Hi, so you're looking for a tutorial on how to make sticker sheets and you found me. So welcome. This is the part 1 of how to make a sticker sheet. In this video, I'll be covering how I do sketches in line art and prepare our artwork for the coloring process. And I'll be out with a part 2 on how to color your sticker sheet. So here's a little quick intro about me. Hi, my name is Mimi and I am the artist behind Studio Memory. For the past 4 years, I've been making illustrations and posting my illustrations online on Instagram. So my shop is actually mainly known for sticker sheets, and here are some of my work. I've also gotten a lot of requests on different guides and questions, and so I thought I'd create a video on addressing those questions and creating a more in-depth guide to making sticker sheets. I did make a tutorial a couple months back, but I feel like there have been some topics that I might have missed or some details that I have glossed over. So I wanted to take the time to break it into 2 parts and go into a more in-depth session. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. Here is the table of contents for this video. So before we get started, I just want to say a couple disclaimers. This tutorial is not showing you a right or wrong way of making art. In fact, there's no really right or wrong way of making a sticker sheet, but this is probably just the process that works best for me, and I am showing you all of my preferences that I use for my process. So if you feel like there's anything throughout the tutorial that does not feel comfortable for you, please do not feel that you have to do the same stuff that I do in order to get really good illustrations. In fact, there are definitely a lot more tutorials out there with a lot of different processes, and every artist has their unique approach to making sticker sheets. I just want to make this tutorial because I know how hard it is to struggle alone and to try to figure out the process by yourself. So I thought that by sharing my process, I might be able to answer someone's long awaited question that they aren't able to find online or anywhere else. And to me, that means more than anything. I remember how much I wanted someone to be able to answer all of my questions when I started out as an artist. So first, let's go over all of the tools and software that I use. So first, if you're making any sort of digital illustration, you would need either a tablet, iPhone, or iPad, or any electronic device that allows you to draw on the digital software. So right now, I'm currently using the iPad Air 4, which is the 10.9-inch one. I got this around 5 years ago and it's still really great for me. I like the size and I think it works well for me. But before that, when I was doing digital illustrations, I used the really cheap Huion tablet that I connected to my Mac. There was a learning curve for the Huion because you don't actually have a screen and you have to try to coordinate your hand to your laptop, but I was able to make a lot of illustrations and you can see some of my past work from before I became the artist behind Studio Memory. And that was all done with the $25 Huion tablet. So besides this iPad, I also use the Apple Pencil and I'm currently using a Apple tip. I like to experiment with different pencil tips. So right now I'm currently using Paperlike's pencil tip and I find it to be pretty sturdy when working on a matte screen protector like this. I don't really have a preference for the type of matte screen protector that I'm using. I just really like the matte screen feeling when I draw, and drawing on it creates a very scratchy sound, which makes it really fun. You can kind of see that this is really worn out. There's a lot of scratches and marks on them, and it's time for me to switch it out soon. For drawing, I know some people like to prop it up at a specific angle. Sometimes I do that, but sometimes I also just leave it flat on the table like this, and I typically find it pretty easy to work on, and so there's no really specific way in which I prop up my iPad. Now let's talk about the different softwares. So I'm using Procreate, which is a paid software. I think it's about $12, but it's a one-time payment and you don't have to subscribe to it on a monthly basis. So I think the price is pretty fair since it's only a one-time payment. And what I really like about it is the interface, and the UI isn't very clogged. So if I were to enter one of my drawings, I don't have panels and panels of stuff on the side. Instead, it's a very empty space and allows me to kind of have a lot of room estate for drawing, and that's what I really like. While I admit that Procreate isn't perfect because there are some missing features like cloud save, I do think that the other functionalities make it not so much of a deal breaker. But if you're looking for free drawing apps, there are a lot online. So some of the free well-known drawing apps out there include Medibank, Fire Alpaca, Krita, and Ibis Paint. Someone did ask me if there was one that was very similar to Procreate. However, I don't think that there is one particularly similar. The free ones are very similar to each other in a sense that they look more like Photoshop rather than Procreate. Before I started using Procreate, I actually used Medibank and I would highly recommend it. There is a bit of a learning curve, but it is really well done, and a lot of the free softwares are really good and are really worth it if you're not looking to pay for Procreate. Now let's talk about the different brushes that I have on Procreate. So I actually use my own brush, and the brush pack is currently listed on my Ko-fi page. I believe it's currently called the Studio Memory 2026 brush. If you're using the 2025 version, they're really similar. I just updated the size a little bit and the stabilization to match my current preferences. So let me give you a quick tour. Today we're only going to discuss the lineart and sketch brushes because I want to save the coloring brushes for the coloring video. So I've linked my Ko-fi page on my site, and you can navigate to the shop site here and click on my tools, and you'll be able to see my brushes. They are free for download. A little donation is also welcome, but it is not expected, and I did have a tutorial on how to download it in my previous video, so I'll be skipping over this step. Once you have this brush pack imported into Procreate, and these brushes are unfortunately only available on Procreate, you will not be able to use them on another drawing software. So for today, we're only going to talk about the Sticker Flake Line Art, Sticker Line Art, and Illustration Line Art 1 and Illustration Line Art 2. So this Sticker Line Art brush is the main one that I use for my sticker. You'll see that there's a bit of a lag. Well, it's not really a lag, but it's actually a stabilization that I have set for my brush. So the values are actually all around 20, and that is my preference because I do like my brushes to be very smooth when I'm drawing because I have really shaky hands, and this helps a lot. My brush is just one uniform size all throughout. It doesn't vary in size based on pressure or opacity because even here I can set the opacity to 0 and it would still be full. And the reason for that is because I've already set the properties of this brush to max, opacity, and the minimum size. If you want to change the size, you can drag these around, but I've already set it at 7%. This prevents the brush from changing sizes when I'm drawing. If I end up drawing a little bit lighter or heavier, I still get the same size without having to worry about accidentally being too hard or being too soft. So I don't actually rely on pressure sensitivity. Another thing to note is sometimes the brush does bloom if you angle it a little bit too much, but I mostly will just undo and retry again with a better angle, and that usually solves the problem. So my brush is not super textured, but there is a little bit of some gaps in between. The Illustration Line Art 1 and Line Art 2 are pretty much the same brushes, except I have their sizes set at a different size, and I have also set some jitter and spacing so that there is a little bit more texture when working on the art. So you might notice some edges. And same thing for Illustration Line Art 2. It is slightly bigger and also has more edges. It also makes the gaps a lot more noticeable, and if you don't like that, go back and retrace them to cover it up. But I do like the gaps, and I leave it in my illustrations. Lastly, we have the Sticker Flake Line Art. This is the brush that's slightly different. It doesn't have any gaps and it has a lot of texture in this brush. This is also the thickest brush I have, and I have a lot of texture and stabilization. So this is what I mainly use for my sticker flake, and I can change the size based on the settings I've set here. So one thing that you can do on Procreate is if you go to you can set it to a specific area and then tap on it again, and then it should have that plus sign. I'm not too sure where the plus sign for mine went, but for most brushes, that plus sign should be available there for you to set the sizes. Now that we've gone through all of the brushes for the line art, we're going to talk about some Procreate shortcuts that I like to use. First is pulling up references. If you go to the canvas here, you would notice that there is something called a reference, and it pulls up this little window for you. Here you have three options. The first is canvas. Basically, it looks at what you're drawing. Some artists will use it to get a more zoomed out version of their illustration, and it lets them really see how their composition really shows up on a really small scale. But you can also import images, and this is what I typically do to pull up my references when I'm drawing. So I do have some Pinterest images saved on my board, and I will pull them up in my illustrations. So another way that you can pull up references is to slightly drag this up, and right now I have the shortcut, but I will usually open up my photo album and pull up my references like so I can work on it. I believe it also allows you to move tabs around, so I really like this. One thing I can also do is fully maximize this and actually make this a little bit smaller, and this pretty much is very similar to the reference tab on Procreate, but I get to have a lot more images rather than just sticking with one image. Another tool that I like using when I'm illustrating is the drawing guide. The 2D grid and the symmetry tool are the ones that I use the most. The 2D grid helps me draw straight lines, and the symmetry tool allows me to draw symmetrical items, and I tend to use that a lot in my illustrations. So now that we know all of my tools, softwares, and shortcuts that I use when sketching and illustrating, we're going to talk about how I sketch. First, you might notice that I don't have a sketch brush. I actually use the same exact brush I use for my line art. You might wonder why I do that despite it having a really strong stabilization, and the reason why for this is because I like to avoid doing lines like this. For me, it tends to be pretty messy, and instead I will try to mostly draw very quick and loose lines without trying to sketch as much. It's not that the first way is wrong, but I saw an artist recommending this years ago when I first started out, and I have found it to be very helpful. For me, it was easier to read whatever lines I drew when they are less messy, and it was less confusing for me when I reached the line art process. I want it to be as easy as possible for me, so that way it's easy for me to do the rest of my art without being confused. While I typically use the eraser to erase small parts, if I notice that I have a big part in my drawing, I actually use the lasso freehand tool, and I will basically just select a large portion and then move it out of my screen really quickly, because anything that's out of sight will be out of mind for me. And that's how I kind of erase large objects really quickly without using the eraser tool. It's a lot neater because I also find out when I erase, I tend to leave like empty spots, and I have to like move the brush multiple times in the same area, and it leaves me spots like this that are also messy to work with. So we're going to go through some of my artworks, and I will show you some of my sketches. This is the widget sticker, and you will notice that I tend to have these really clean lines rather than jagged lines, and it's usually all throughout my illustrations except for small parts where I need to go in and fix. And so my sketches are pretty easy to read and easy to understand, so that way I can get into the line art really quickly. Another example is here is my line art, and it's just really brief, really quick, and I try to be really neat about it. So throughout this time lapse, this is my entire sketch process, and I really try my best to make my lines as neat and clean as possible. So that way it's easy for me to read and understand by the time I get to my sketch process. So overall, I really recommend trying to make as clean of a sketch as possible, because this makes your line art process a lot easier and a lot less frustrating to deal with. I haven't finished this artwork yet, but here is also my line art process for May. While the shapes are not perfect, which is something I can usually clean up during the line art process, I can easily figure out what exactly I'm drawing and work from there. And that's what has helped me a lot to just get the ideas out and be able to complete my illustrations. Now let's quickly talk about line art. So for the line art, and I kind of want to take you through the process with me. So we're going to take this illustration as an example, and I'm going to pull up my draft. And I want to do a couple with you to show you how I get the hang of it. So when we have the sketch layer, I would usually lower the opacity to around 10-ish percent so that I can still see the lines. It doesn't bother me too much. Another option is to alpha lock it and switch a color that's dark but also not black, so it's easy to differ from your line art. So once I have that, I will start with my line art. I usually use a black color to start with. And for example, a piece like this where it's symmetrical, then I will pull up the drawing guide and modify the symmetry tool to help me with the illustration. And I try to take my time and be really slow with it. For most of my artwork, I try to make my lines connect, but sometimes I might do something like this where I leave gaps in between, and I think it can be cute depending on the mood I'm feeling for my illustration. But for this one, I want it to be really neat and clean, so I will not be including any gaps. The symmetry tool helps so much because it allows me to really be able to have like a precise drawing while I only have to focus on one side. To get really cute shapes, I usually don't use sharp edges and I mostly round out my squares. Lastly, another tip that I've learned from an artist in the past is when the lines meet, I would actually tend to round out the corners where they meet so that way it looks a little bit better. So I will go back to the edges like that and kind of just round out the corners a little bit like this. It also kind of like acts as a fake pressure sensitivity for those of you who aren't using an actual Apple Pencil. This is also a cool little trick to help you kind of be able to mimic that added pressure in your pencil. When doing the line art, I like to make a lot of layers. And the reason for this is because I know that I've already completed this part and everything looks good and I don't want to mess it up and I want to fit something in. I will make a new layer so that way I can kind of test things around and see what works and what doesn't work. And then once I'm happy with it, I will kind of just erase and finalize it. Once I feel like I'm happy, then I'll merge things together. And that's usually how I do stuff. So one example of this is I want to draw a straight line across. And rather than having to stop, draw the circle, go, draw the circle, and go again, I will just draw the straight line first, create a new layer, draw the circle, duplicate it, erase the parts I don't like, and then once I'm happy with everything and it looks good, then that's when I'll merge the layers. And this way it kind of helps me have a faster line art process because I'm not stopping to account for every single shape, and instead I just draw everything as much as I can out and then work on erasing the shapes that I don't need. So I currently don't have any open sketches right now, but I'm going to open this one and kind of just redo the sketch to kind of show you my process for making my illustration. This one is a sticker flake, so we're going to use a sticker flake line art. Alright, I'm done with my illustration. It was a pretty quick one, and you might notice that I now have a bunch of layers. So what I'll do is I'll just click on the folder that I created and flatten them, and now they are all merged together. I actually like this new line art a lot more, so I think I'm going to keep this one. But one thing that I'm going to quickly go over is soften up the edges a little bit and fix the texture. But other than that, I'm really happy and I hope it helps you. I don't know why that was there. So overall, I am a lot more happy with this illustration and I am actually going to use this one over the previous one. I guess this is considered my sketch number 2. I hope it helped you understand my line art process a little bit better and see how I kind of kept building on the layers over and over until I got to my illustration. And I don't really use my erase tool at all. I mostly just use the lasso tool to kind of drag everything out of the screen, because anything that you move into the areas outside of the canvas will no longer be part of your layers. I find that to be really helpful throughout this process, and so that's how I take advantage of speeding up my artwork. So overall, this was pretty brief, but I hope that this was helpful. And if you have any questions, let me know. I will do my best to answer them. I know I mostly covered sketches and line art in this video, but if you have questions on other things, also let me know in the below and I'll try my best to answer them. And I will also try my best to create other tutorials based on the questions that I get asked the most. So I hope you find this helpful, and thank you so much for stopping by and watching, and see you next time in my coloring tutorial. Bye!